The desert wind howled across the endless plains of Arizona territory like a wounded wolf. Sand whipped across the empty road outside the dusty frontier town of Red Hollow, rattling the wooden signs of its few buildings: the saloon, the general store, the blacksmith, and the small sheriff's office whose lantern barely flickered against the rising storm. Most folks in Red Hollow had already taken shelter. Storms like this weren't ordinary desert winds. They were the kind that buried wagons, scattered cattle, and left foolish travelers lost in the dark. Inside the Silver Spur Saloon, however, the storm was just background noise. The place glowed warm with lantern light and smelled of whiskey, tobacco, and dust. A piano clinked out a crooked melody while gamblers leaned over poker tables and cowboys argued about cattle prices. In the far corner, sitting alone at a small table near the wall, was a man who looked like he belonged more to the storm than to the saloon. His name was Caleb Walker. Most people in Red Hollow knew him. Some feared him, others respected him. Caleb was a tall, broad-shouldered cowboy with sunburned skin, a thick dark beard, and a pair of steady gray eyes that looked like they had seen more trouble than most men could survive. He ran a ranch a few miles outside town, the Iron Creek Ranch, but Caleb wasn't known for talking much. Truth was, since his wife died 3 years earlier during a raid by cattle thieves, he rarely spoke at all. Folks said something in him had gone cold that day. He worked his ranch, he rode his horse, he came to town once every few weeks for supplies, then he disappeared again into the desert. Silence, tonight, was one of those rare visits. Caleb sat quietly, with a glass of whiskey in his hand, watching the storm slam against the saloon windows. The bartender wiped a mug and shook his head. Storm like this'll keep the road empty till morning, he muttered. Caleb didn't answer. His attention had drifted to the door. Something about the wind outside had changed. It was louder now, more violent, and then bang, the saloon doors burst open. The storm blew in like a wild animal, carrying dust, sand, and cold desert air, and in the doorway stood a woman. Every conversation in the room died instantly. She looked like she had ridden straight through hell to get there. Her coat was soaked with rain and dust. Her dark hair clung wetly to her face. One hand clutched the doorframe as though it was the only thing keeping her standing. Behind her, the storm roared. The piano player stopped mid-note. The gamblers stared. An old woman traveled alone across desert territory during a storm like this. It simply didn't happen, and if it did, it usually meant trouble. The stranger stepped slowly into the saloon. Her boots left wet prints across the wooden floor. Her eyes moved carefully across the room, sharp, alert, watching everyone. She looked exhausted, but there was something else in her gaze. Strength. The kind that only came from surviving something terrible. A drunk cowboy at the bar chuckled. Well now, he slurred. Looks like the storm blew us a pretty little surprise. The room laughed, but the woman didn't. She simply walked past him without a word, straight toward the fireplace in the corner where Caleb Walker sat. She stopped a few feet away. For a moment neither of them spoke. Caleb studied her quietly. Her clothes were dusty, but not cheap. Her hands were rough, like someone used to work, and there was a small leather holster beneath her coat. Not many women carried guns. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was soft but steady. "May I warm by your fire?" The words were simple, but something in the way she said them made the whole room fall silent. Again, Caleb looked at the empty chair across from him, then back at her. "Fire ain't mine," he said calmly. He nodded toward the flames. "But you're welcome to it." She hesitated only a second before stepping closer and lowering herself into the chair, but the warmth hit her immediately. For a long moment she simply held her hands toward the flames, breathing slowly, as if she hadn't felt warmth in days. Caleb watched quietly. Most men in the room were still staring. The bartender leaned toward another cowboy. "You think she's lost?" he whispered. The cowboy shrugged. "Or running." Caleb noticed the woman glance over her shoulder. She had heard them, but she didn't react. Instead, she turned back toward the fire. After a moment, Caleb slid his whiskey glass across the table. "Drink," he said. She looked surprised. "You sure? Storm like that'll freeze a body quicker than you think." She accepted the glass, took a small sip, coughed slightly, then smiled faintly. "Thank you." Up close, Caleb could see her better now. She wasn't delicate like the women in fancy towns. There was grit in her face, determination, and something hidden, something heavy. "What's your name?" Caleb asked. She hesitated, then answered, "Anna." Caleb nodded slowly. "You got somewhere to stay tonight, Anna?" She looked toward the storm raging outside the windows, then shook her head. "No." The saloon grew quiet again, everyone listening, because they all knew what that meant. A woman, alone. In a frontier town. During a storm. It rarely ended well. Caleb leaned back in his chair. "You ride into Red Hollow alone?" "Yes." "From where?" "Far." Her answers were careful, short, like someone used to hiding the truth. Caleb studied her a moment longer, then asked the question that mattered. "You running from something?" Anna's eyes flickered for just a second. Then she looked back at the fire. "Maybe." The room murmured quietly, but Caleb didn't push further. He simply stood up. The chair scraped loudly against the floor. Anna looked up. "So," he said calmly, "you can sleep in the saloon and deal with whatever trouble finds you." He paused. "Or you can ride back to my ranch tonight?" The room erupted instantly. "What? You crazy, Walker? Bringing a stranger home?" Caleb ignored them. His eyes stayed on Anna. "My ranch is 10 miles east," he continued. "Storm's bad, but my horse knows the trail." Anna looked stunned. "You don't even know me." Caleb shrugged. "You asked to warm by the fire." He grabbed his hat from the table. "And I reckon no decent man leaves a woman alone in a place like this." For the first time since she arrived, Anna's strong composure cracked. Her eyes softened, just slightly. "Why would you help me?" she asked quietly. Caleb paused at the door. "Because," he said without turning around, "something tells me you've had enough trouble already." The storm howled louder. Anna stood slowly, picked up her coat, and followed him outside. The moment the doors opened, wind and rain swallowed them. The saloon watched from inside. One cowboy shook his head. Walker's lost his mind. But the bartender frowned toward the window. "No," he muttered. "I think that woman just rode straight into his destiny." Aside, Caleb mounted his horse, then extended his hand toward Anna. She climbed up behind him. The horse stepped into the storm. Lightning cracked across the desert sky, and far in the distance, 3 riders appeared on the ridge overlooking Red Hollow, watching. One of them lowered a spyglass and smiled coldly. "Well now," he said, "looks like we found her." The outlaw leader turned his horse toward the storm. Right behind them, thunder rolled across the desert, and Caleb Walker rode unknowingly toward the greatest danger of his life, because the mysterious woman clinging to his back was not just running from trouble. She was carrying a secret powerful men were willing to kill for, and they were already on her trail. The storm followed them like a shadow across the desert. Rain slashed sideways through the wind as Caleb Walker's horse pushed forward through the darkness. The animal knew the trail well, the narrow path that cut across the rocky hills toward Iron Creek Ranch. Behind Caleb, Anna held tightly to the back of his coat. The cold had begun to creep into her bones, but the warmth of his body and the steady rhythm of the horse kept her from freezing. She hadn't planned any of this. Hours earlier, she had only been trying to survive long enough to reach the next town. She certainly hadn't planned on meeting a quiet cowboy who offered shelter without asking questions. The lightning flashing across the desert revealed the outline of distant hills. Anna leaned closer to Caleb. "How much farther?" she called over the wind. 5 minutes, he shouted back. Sure enough, Within moments, a faint lantern glow appeared through the rain. Iron Creek Ranch. The ranch sat in a shallow valley surrounded by low desert hills. A wooden house stood near a wide corral, and beside it were a barn and several smaller outbuildings. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid. The kind of place built by a man who cared more about survival than comfort. Caleb guided the horse into the yard and jumped down first. He turned and lifted Anna gently from the saddle. Her boots touched the muddy ground, but for a second she wobbled from exhaustion. Caleb steadied her with one hand. "You all right?" She nodded quickly. "I will be." He didn't push further. Instead, he led the horse toward the barn. "You get inside," he said. "There's dry blankets near the stove." "You sure?" "I'll be there in a minute." Anna hesitated before walking toward the house. For the first time since she'd arrived in Red Hollow, she felt something unfamiliar. Safety inside. The ranch house smelled of wood, smoke, and leather. The single-room cabin was simple but warm. A large iron stove glowed in the corner, casting flickering light across the wooden walls. A table sat near the window, and a narrow bed rested against the far wall. Anna closed the door against the storm. Her hands trembled as she removed her soaked coat. The fire felt heavenly. She stood there quietly, letting the warmth slowly return to her body. Moments later, the door opened again. Caleb stepped inside, brushing rain from his hat. He hung his coat on a hook and moved to the stove, adding another log. The flames leapt higher. "You hungry?" he asked. Anna nodded. "Very." Caleb opened a small cupboard and pulled out a pan. "Only got beans and bread tonight." "That sounds perfect." He cooked quietly while the storm roared. Outside, Anna watched him. There was something calming about the way he moved. Steady, patient, like a man used to doing everything alone. "Do you live here by yourself?" she asked. "Yes." "No ranch hands?" "Had some once." "What happened?" Caleb stirred the beans slowly. "They moved on." He didn't explain further. Anna sensed the silence behind his words and didn't push. Soon, he handed her a bowl. She sat at the table and ate like someone who hadn't seen real food in days. Caleb leaned against the counter, watching her. "You ride well," he said. She looked up. "You notice that? Most women ain't comfortable on a horse in a storm." She shrugged slightly. "I grew up around them." "Where?" Anna paused again. Caleb saw the hesitation but said nothing. Finally, she answered. "Near Santa Fe." "Family there?" "Not anymore." The answer hung quietly between them. Caleb nodded once. He understood loss better than most. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills. Anna finished eating and leaned back slightly, exhaustion finally catching up with her. "This place is beautiful," she said softly. Caleb glanced around. "Most folks would call it lonely." She smiled faintly. "Lonely places can still feel peaceful." Caleb studied her face in the firelight. She was stronger than he first thought, but there was sadness in her eyes, the kind that didn't fade easily. "You can take the bed," he said. "I'll sleep by the fire." And it immediately shook her head. "No, I can sleep on the floor. Bed's big enough." She blinked. I mean sleep," Caleb said calmly, and stared at him for a moment, then laughed quietly for the first time since he met her. "You're not what I expected, Caleb Walker." "What did you expect?" "A cowboy who brings strange women home during storms. Usually expect something." Caleb shrugged. "I expect you to sleep." She studied him again, then slowly nodded. "Thank you." Later that night, the storm finally began to weaken. Anna lay on one side of the bed while Caleb rested on the other, still wearing most of his clothes. The room was quiet except for the crackling fire. For a long time neither of them slept. "You ever think about leaving this place?" Anna asked softly. Caleb stared at the ceiling. "Sometimes." "Why don't you?" "Because it's mine." She turned her head slightly toward him. "You built it?" "With my wife." The word hung in the air. Anna spoke gently. "What happened to her?" Caleb's voice became quiet. "Cattle thieves." The fire popped loudly. "They attacked the ranch 3 years ago, and his chest tightened. I'm sorry, he didn't answer for a moment. I buried her under the oak tree behind the house, and a look toward the dark window. That must have been hard. Caleb nodded once. It was. Silence filled the room again, but something had changed between them. The walls around Caleb's heart had cracked just a little. Eventually, Anna whispered, "You're a good man, Caleb Walker." He didn't reply, but for the first time in years, he slept peacefully. Meanwhile, miles away in the desert, 3 riders moved through the darkness. The storm had slowed them, but it hadn't stopped them. Their leader, a tall outlaw with a scar across his cheek, held a lantern close to the ground. Horse tracks were visible in the mud. Fresh. He smiled. "She didn't get far." One of the men asked, "You sure that's the girl, boss?" The outlaw nodded. "She's carrying something very valuable." "And the cowboy?" The leader's smile disappeared. "If he gets in the way." He cocked the hammer on his revolver. "He dies with the rest." The 3 riders turned their horses east, toward Iron Creek Ranch. Back at the ranch, night passed quietly. Morning sunlight slowly crept through the window, and awoke first. For a moment she didn't remember where she was. Then she saw Caleb sleeping in the chair by the fire. He must have moved there during the night. She smiled softly. The lonely cowboy who trusted a stranger, the man who offered warmth without questions. She stepped quietly outside. The desert looked beautiful after the storm. Golden sunlight stretched across the hills. For the first time in weeks, Anna felt hope. But as she walked toward the corral, her eyes suddenly widened. Fresh hoofprints, 3 horses, coming from the west, and they were heading straight toward the ranch. Anna's heart began pounding. She turned quickly toward the house. "Caleb!" she shouted. Inside, Caleb grabbed his rifle instantly. "What's wrong?" Her voice shook. "They found me." Caleb stepped outside beside her. In the distance, 3 riders appeared over the hill, riding fast, and the man leading them raised a rifle. Caleb's eyes hardened. "Well," he muttered calmly, "looks like your trouble finally caught up." He chambered a round in the rifle, then looked at Anna. "Question is..." The riders galloped closer. "What exactly did you bring to my ranch?" And as the outlaws rode straight toward Iron Creek Ranch, Anna whispered the words that changed everything. "They're not just after me," she swallowed. "They're after something I stole from them." Caleb's grip tightened on the rifle. "What?" Anna's voice trembled. "A map." Caleb frowned. "A map to what?" Anna looked toward the approaching riders, then back at him. "To a fortune buried somewhere in this desert." The outlaws raised their guns. The first shot rang across the valley, and Caleb Walker realized something terrifying. This woman hadn't just brought danger to his ranch, she had brought a war. The first gunshot echoed across Iron Creek Ranch like thunder, splitting the morning sky. Dust exploded from the wooden corral fence as the bullet struck it. Caleb Walker didn't flinch. Years of living on the frontier had trained him well. The moment he heard the shot, his body reacted without hesitation. He grabbed Anna's arm and pulled her behind the water trough near the barn. "Stay low," he ordered. The 3 riders thundered closer, their horses kicking up clouds of wet desert dust. The man leading them was tall and lean, with a long black coat and a scar running down the side of his face. Even from a distance, there was something cold and dangerous in his posture. Caleb studied him carefully. Not a rancher, not a traveler, an outlaw. The man raised his rifle again and fired another warning shot that struck the dirt just a few feet away. "Morning, cowboy," the outlaw shouted. His voice carried easily across the open ranch. "You got something that belongs to me." Caleb rested his rifle across the trough and aimed calmly. "You'd better turn around," he called back, "before somebody gets hurt." The outlaw laughed. "Oh, somebody definitely getting hurt." The 3 riders slowed their horses about 30 yards from the ranch house. Caleb's gray eyes narrowed. "Friends of yours?" he asked quietly, without looking at Anna. She swallowed. "Yes." "That the one leading them?" "Yes." "What's his name?" Anna hesitated, then she whispered it. "Victor Kane." The name meant nothing to Caleb, but the fear in her voice meant everything. Who is he? Caleb asked. Anna looked toward the riders again, her hands trembling slightly. He's the reason I ran. Victor Kane leaned forward in his saddle, studying the ranch like a man, inspecting property he already owned. Well now, he called out. This is disappointing. He removed his hat slowly. I thought you'd have more sense than to hide behind a stranger. Anna, her heart stopped. He knows your name, Caleb said quietly. Yes. Victor's sharp eyes locked onto the water trough where they were hiding. Come on now, he shouted. Don't make this harder than it has to be. The two men beside him spread out slightly on their horses, each holding rifles loosely across their saddles. Professional killers. Caleb could tell. Men who had done this before. You've got 10 seconds to bring me the map, Victor continued, or I start burning this ranch down one building at a time. Caleb's jaw tightened. He glanced at Anna. What map? She reached slowly inside her coat. Caleb's body tensed immediately, but instead of a weapon, she pulled out a folded piece of old, worn parchment. Even from a distance, Caleb could see faint markings and lines drawn across it. Is that it? He asked. Yes. What does it lead to? Anna looked at the paper like it was both hope and curse at the same time. Gold. Caleb blinked. Gold? Not just gold, she said quietly. A lost mine. His eyebrows rose slightly. You serious? She nodded. 3 weeks ago, worked as a clerk in a trading office in Santa Fe. And one night, Victor Kane came in drunk with one of his men. Her voice trembled as she continued. They were arguing about a treasure map. Caleb listened carefully while keeping his rifle aimed at the riders. I wasn't supposed to hear it, Anna said, but I did. Victor's voice suddenly cut across the yard again. 5 seconds. Anna hurried. They said the map led to the San Diablo mine. Caleb frowned. That place is a legend, not a legend. Anna whispered. A real mine filled with gold. That was hidden during the Civil War. Caleb's grip tightened on the rifle. Let me guess. You stole the map, Anna nodded. I thought if I could reach Red Hollow, I might sell it to someone powerful enough to protect me. Caleb glanced at the approaching outlaws. Again, looks like they caught up first. Victor fired another shot, this one smashing through the ranch house window. Glass shattered. That was your last warning, he shouted. Anna looked at Caleb with panic in her eyes. I'm so sorry. For what? For bringing them here. Caleb looked back at the 3 riders calmly. Trouble has a way of finding me anyway. Then he stood up slowly behind the trough. Victor's eyes lit up. Well, look at that. The cowboy's finally grown some sense. Caleb kept his rifle aimed straight at Victor's chest. You got 2 choices, Caleb said. Victor smirked. I'm listening. You turn around and ride away. The 2 outlaws beside Victor burst out laughing. Victor tilted his head slightly. And the second choice? Caleb cocked the rifle. You stay. Victor sighed dramatically. You know, I was hoping you'd say something like that. He raised his hand slowly, and then everything exploded. The 2 outlaws fired their rifles at the same time. Caleb dropped behind the trough and fired back instantly. Crack. One outlaw's hat flew off his head as Caleb's bullet grazed past him. The horses panicked, kicking wildly. Anna covered her ears as gunfire echoed across the ranch. Stay down, Caleb shouted. Another bullet smashed into the trough inches above his head, spraying splinters everywhere. Victor Kane grinned wildly from his saddle. Oh, this is fun. He fired again. Caleb leaned out and squeezed the trigger. This time his aim was perfect. Bang! One outlaw screamed as the bullet tore through his shoulder, knocking him off his horse. The man hit the dirt hard and rolled. Groaning, Victor's smile faded slightly. Well now, he looked at Caleb with new respect. Maybe you're not just a lonely rancher after all. Caleb didn't respond. He simply reloaded calmly and stared at him with shock. You shot him. He'll live. How do you know? I aimed that way. Victor slowly dismounted his horse, landing softly on the ground. You're impressive, cowboy, he called out. But let's not pretend you can win this. He gestured toward the desert hills behind him. Because I didn't come alone. Caleb's stomach dropped slightly, and his face went pale. What does he mean? She whispered. As if answering her question, more riders appeared over the ridge. 5 of them, armed, riding fast toward the ranch. Victor smiled again. See? Caleb stared at the approaching men. 8 outlaws total now, against 1 cowboy. Victor pointed toward the house. Bring me the map, Anna, and maybe I'll let your cowboy friend live. Anna looked at Caleb desperately. We can't fight that many. Caleb's mind worked quickly, then he spoke calmly. You got horses in the barn? Yes. Good. Anna frowned. What are you thinking? Caleb looked toward the hills behind the ranch. A narrow canyon trail cut through them. Dangerous, but fast. We ride. Her eyes widened. They'll chase us. Caleb nodded. That's the idea. He grabbed her hand. Suddenly, come on. The 2 of them sprinted toward the barn as bullets slammed into the ground behind them. Victor roared with laughter. Oh no, you don't. He jumped onto his horse again. After them, the outlaws thundered forward. Inside the barn, Caleb threw open the stall doors and saddled 2 horses. With lightning speed, Anna climbed onto one. Her heart raced. Where are we going? Caleb swung onto his horse and kicked it forward. To find that mine. Anna stared at him. What? Caleb grinned slightly. If those men want the map that badly. He turned the horse toward the canyon trail. Then I reckon it's worth finding. Behind them, 8 outlaws rode hard across the valley. Victor Kane's voice echoed across the desert. Run while you can, cowboy. His eyes burned with fury. Because when I catch you. He cocked his revolver. You're both dead. Caleb and Anna raced toward the canyon. The chase had begun. But neither of them knew something even more dangerous waited ahead. Because the San Diablo mine wasn't just lost. It was cursed. And the last men who tried to claim its gold never came back alive. The canyon swallowed them like the mouth of a giant beast. Jagged red cliffs towered on both sides as Caleb and Anna raced deeper into the narrow desert passage. Their horses' hooves thundered against the rocky ground, echoing through the twisting canyon walls. Behind them, the sound of pursuing riders slowly faded. For now, Caleb knew it wouldn't last long. Victor Kane and his men weren't the kind to give up, especially not when gold was involved. Anna gripped the reins tightly as her horse leapt over loose stones. Are we losing them? She called over the wind. Caleb glanced over his shoulder. Dust clouds still rose in the distance. Not yet, he replied. But the canyon will slow them. The trail curved sharply, winding through tall rock formations and narrow passages that only experienced riders could handle at full speed. Luckily, Caleb knew this territory. He had spent years riding through these hills while herding cattle, but even he had never ridden this fast through the canyon. After another mile, the trail widened slightly into a small valley surrounded by towering stone cliffs. A thin stream trickled through the middle, surrounded by a few desert trees. Caleb slowed his horse. We stop here, Anna pulled up beside him, breathing hard. Her hair was wild from the wind, and dust covered her coat. You sure that's safe? For a little while, Caleb dismounted and tied the horses near the water. They'll need rest. Anna slid down from her saddle. Her legs trembled slightly after the hard ride. For a moment she simply stood there, staring at the quiet canyon. The silence felt strange after the chaos of gunfire and pursuit. Thank you, she said softly. Caleb looked at her. For what? For not leaving me back there. He shrugged slightly. I'm not the kind of man who runs from trouble. Anna smiled faintly. Noticed. They walked toward the stream and knelt to splash water on their faces. The cool liquid felt refreshing against their dusty skin. For a few peaceful moments, the world seemed calm again, but the danger still lingered like a shadow. Caleb sat on a rock and studied the map Anna had taken from her coat. It was old, very old. The parchment had yellowed with age, and the ink lines had faded in places, yet the drawing was clear enough to follow. Mountains, canyons, a symbol marking the San Diablo mine. You ever been there? Anna asked. Caleb shook his head. No one has. Why not? He tapped the map thoughtfully. Because most folks believe the mine is cursed. Anna sighed. I've heard that story. Not just a story, Caleb looked toward the canyon walls. 20 years ago, a group of miners supposedly found it, and they never came back. Anna crossed her arms. So, people say the mine is haunted. Caleb gave a small shrug. Or maybe they killed each other over the gold. That explanation felt far more believable. Anna stared at the map again. Do you think the gold is real? Caleb folded the parchment slowly. Victor Kane certainly thinks so. And you? Caleb met her gaze. I think men don't chase legends with rifles. The wind moved softly through the canyon trees. Anna sat beside him on the rock. You know, she said quietly, I never meant for any of this to happen. Caleb raised an eyebrow. You mean stealing a treasure map from an outlaw? She laughed softly. When you say it like that, it sounds worse. It is worse. Anna looked out across the desert valley. I was tired of living my life in fear, she admitted. Fear of what? Men like Victor. Her voice hardened slightly. He owns half the criminal gangs in New Mexico territory. Caleb frowned. You serious? He smuggles weapons, steals cattle, robs stagecoaches. Anna paused. And kills anyone who crosses him. Caleb leaned back against the rock. Well, that explains why he's so determined. Anna looked at him curiously. You don't seem scared. Caleb thought for a moment. I've already lost the most important thing in my life. Anna's expression softened. Your wife. He nodded. So, what's one more fight? For a long moment, they simply looked at each other. Something unspoken passed between them, the beginning of something deeper. Anna felt her heart beating faster. This quiet cowboy who had taken her in without hesitation, who now risked his life for her, was unlike any man she had ever known. You're different, Caleb Walker, she whispered. How so? You're brave. Caleb chuckled. Slightly. Oh, a stubborn. She smiled. Maybe. Both. Suddenly a sound echoed through the canyon, distant hoofbeats. Then, another. Caleb's head snapped toward the sound. Instantly. They found us. Anna's heart dropped. Already? Caleb stood quickly and grabbed his rifle. But something felt wrong. The sound of hoofbeats was too light, too slow. Then a single rider appeared at the canyon entrance. Both Caleb and Anna froze. Because they recognized him. Sheriff Daniel Harper from Red Hollow. Anna frowned. The sheriff? Caleb looked equally confused. Sheriff Harper raised his hands peacefully as he approached. Easy. Now, he called. I ain't here to fight. Caleb kept the rifle aimed anyway. What are you doing out here, Harper? The sheriff dismounted slowly. I came to warn you. Anna stepped forward cautiously. Warn us about what? The sheriff's eyes shifted briefly to the map in Caleb's hand. Victor Kane. Caleb narrowed his eyes. We already know he's after us. Harper nodded. Yes. But what you don't know. He paused. Is that he? Ain't the only one looking for that mine. Anna felt her stomach twist. What do you mean? The sheriff's voice dropped. There's another group. Who? Harper looked straight at Caleb. Your old enemies. Caleb's face darkened instantly. Which ones? Harper hesitated, then said the name. The Black Ridge Gang. Anna saw Caleb's entire body go still. Caleb? She whispered. He didn't answer. His knuckles tightened around the rifle. Because the Black Ridge Gang was the same group of outlaws responsible for the raid that killed his wife. And if they were hunting the mine too, then this chase wasn't just about gold anymore. It was about revenge. The sheriff stepped closer. You need to get out of here, Harper said urgently. They're riding this way right now. Caleb's voice turned cold. How do you know? For a brief moment, the sheriff didn't answer. Anna noticed something strange. His hand slowly drifted toward his holster. Her eyes widened. Caleb. But it was too late. Sheriff Harper drew his revolver and aimed it straight at Caleb's chest. Because, the sheriff said, with a crooked smile, I'm working with them, and it gasped. Caleb's eyes burned with fury. "You sold us out." Harper shrugged. "Gold makes men do interesting things." Behind him more riders appeared at the canyon entrance, Victor Kane's gang, and far behind them, another group of dark riders crested the ridge, the Black Ridge gang, 2 outlaw armies, 1 map, 1 cowboy, and 1 woman standing between them all. "Sheriff." Harper cocked the revolver. "Hand over the map," he said calmly, "or this canyon becomes your grave." Caleb slowly lifted his rifle, and his heart pounded, because she realized something terrifying. This wasn't just a chase anymore. It was about to become a war, and they were standing right in the middle of it. The canyon air grew thick with tension. Dust drifted slowly across the rocky ground as 3 different groups faced each other in a silent standoff. On one side stood Caleb Walker and Anna, near the small stream, their horses restless behind them. Across from them, only 20 yards away, Sheriff Daniel Harper aimed his revolver with steady hands. Behind him sat Victor Kane and his outlaws, their rifles ready, and above the canyon ridge, a second group of riders appeared like shadows against the sky, the Black Ridge gang, the same gang that had burned Caleb's ranch years ago, the same men who had murdered his wife. Caleb felt something cold and heavy rise inside his chest. Not fear, something darker, and it could see it in his eyes. "Caleb," she whispered, but he didn't answer. His attention was fixed on the riders slowly descending the canyon trail. Their front rode a large man with a thick beard and a black hat. A scar cut across his cheek like a crooked lightning bolt. Caleb recognized him instantly. Rufus Dalton, the leader of the Black Ridge gang, the man responsible for everything Caleb had lost. Dalton pulled his horse to a stop at the bottom of the trail and surveyed the canyon. "Well, now," he said in a deep voice. "Looks like we arrived just in time, Victor." Kane turned his horse toward the new arrivals with irritation. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Dalton grinned. "Wouldn't miss this for the world." His eyes slowly scanned the canyon floor. Then they stopped on Caleb. For a moment, confusion crossed his face. Then recognition struck. "Well, be damned." His grin widened. "Caleb Walker." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Rufus Dalton." The outlaw laughed. "I thought you were dead." Caleb's voice dropped like steel. Yet. Dalton leaned forward on his saddle, amused. "This is a small world, boys." He gestured toward Caleb. "The stubborn cowboy used to own a ranch out west." Caleb raised the rifle slightly. "You burned it." Dalton shrugged casually. "Business." Anna stared at Caleb in shock. "You never told me." "There wasn't time," Caleb said quietly. Dalton's gaze shifted to Anna. "And who might this be?" Victor Kane answered for her. "The woman with the map." Dalton's eyebrows rose. "Ah." His smile grew sharper. "So that's the famous treasure map." He looked back toward Caleb. "Funny thing about gold, cowboy, it attracts all kinds of people." Sheriff Harper chuckled nervously. "Let's not forget who found her first." Dalton glanced at the sheriff. "Oh, we didn't." Before Harper could react, Dalton suddenly drew his revolver. Bang! The shot echoed violently through the canyon. Sheriff Harper collapsed instantly, falling lifeless into the dirt. Anna gasped. Victor Kane didn't look surprised. "You never liked him anyway," Kane said. Dalton holstered the revolver calmly. "Sheriffs are bad for business." The canyon fell silent again. Now only 2 forces remained: Victor Kane's gang and the Black Ridge gang, both staring at Caleb and Anna, both wanting the map. Victor broke the silence. "First, here's how this goes." He pointed his rifle toward Anna. "You hand me the map, then I'll let you and the cowboy ride away." Dalton laughed loudly. "You believe that nonsense?" He looked down at Caleb. "Son, if you give him that map, he'll shoot you the second you turn around." Caleb nodded slightly. "I know." Victor scowled. "Then maybe I should just take it." His men raised their rifles. Dalton's gang did the same. 12 guns aimed in every direction. One wrong move, and the canyon would explode, and his heart pounded. She slowly stepped forward. Stop. Every eye turned to her. I'm tired of running, she said. Her voice was steady. Despite the danger, you all want the map. She held up the parchment. Victor's eyes lit up greedily. So let's settle this another way. Dalton smirked. I'm listening. Anna raised the map higher. You follow the trail on this map. She pointed toward the deeper canyon beyond them. The mine is somewhere beyond those cliffs. Victor frowned. You expect us to just believe that? Anna shrugged. Believe what you want. She folded the map carefully. But I know something you don't. Dalton leaned forward. And what's that? Anna smiled slightly. The mine entrance collapses if the wrong path is taken. The outlaws exchanged uneasy glances. Victor narrowed his eyes. You're lying. Am I? Anna looked directly at him. Without me, you'll never find the gold. Dalton rubbed his beard thoughtfully. Well now, that changes things. He looked toward Victor Kane. Seems like we both need the girl alive. Victor hated the idea, but he knew she might be telling the truth. Fine, he said. We take her with us. Anna quickly shook her head. No. Victor's temper flared. You don't get to make demands. Yes, I do, she said firmly. Because I'm the only one who can read the map. The canyon grew quiet again, and it took a slow breath. Only one person comes with me, Victor. And Dalton spoke at the same time. Me. Anna shook her head. Neither of you. She turned toward Caleb. Him. Caleb blinked in surprise. You trust him? Victor asked. I do. Dalton laughed loudly again. You're joking. Anna didn't smile. If you want the gold, Caleb comes with me. Victor's eyes burned with suspicion. And what stops you two from running? Anna slowly tore the map in half. Gasps echoed through the canyon. She held one half in each hand. Because each of you will hold one piece. The outlaws stared at her in stunned silence. Without both pieces, she continued, the mine can't be found. Victor Kane slowly grinned. Clever. Dalton nodded approvingly. Like her. Anna tossed one half of the map toward Victor, the other half toward Dalton. Both men caught the pieces. Then Anna stepped beside Caleb. We ride together, she said calmly. You follow. Caleb leaned toward her. You sure about this? She whispered back. It's the only way. Victor raised his rifle slightly. All right then, start riding, Dalton added with a dark grin. And don't try anything stupid. Caleb helped Anna onto her horse, then mounted his own. The two of them began riding slowly deeper into the canyon. Behind them, two outlaw gangs followed, each man dreaming of gold, each man ready to betray the others. And Caleb realized something as he rode beside Anna. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something bigger, something worth fighting for, because somewhere beyond these cliffs waited a fortune that could change everything. But also waiting there was the final battle, and not everyone would survive it. As they reached the far end of the canyon, Anna leaned closer to Caleb. There's something I didn't tell them, she whispered. What? Her voice trembled slightly. The mine isn't just dangerous. Caleb frowned. What do you mean? Anna looked toward the towering cliffs ahead. Because once we open it, she swallowed. There's no way to close it again. Behind them, Victor Kane raised his rifle. Rufus Dalton cocked his revolver, and the canyon slowly narrowed into darkness. The final showdown had begun. The canyon narrowed into a shadowy passage between towering cliffs. The sun was beginning to sink toward the western horizon, painting the desert sky with deep orange and crimson light. Long shadows stretched across the rocky ground as Caleb and Anna rode slowly ahead of the two outlaw gangs. Behind them came the sound of hooves, leather creaking, and the occasional click of a rifle hammer. Victor Kane's men rode on one side of the trail. Rufus Dalton and the Black Ridge gang rode on the other. Every outlaw watched Caleb and Anna closely. Nobody trusted anyone anymore. and leaned slightly toward Caleb as they rode. "We're almost there," she whispered. Caleb glanced at her. "You sure?" She nodded. "I studied the map every night while I was running." Ahead of them, the canyon ended at a massive wall of jagged stone. At first glance it looked like a dead end. Victor Kane frowned from behind them. "Don't tell me this map leads to a rock wall." Dalton chuckled. "Maybe the girl fooled us after all," and guided her horse toward the cliff face. There, she pointed to a narrow crack between two large boulders. It was barely wide enough for a person to pass through. Caleb dismounted and approached it cautiously. Inside the narrow opening, a dark tunnel disappeared into the mountain. Cool air drifted out from the depths, and a step beside him, the San Diablo. "Mine," she whispered. Victor Kane jumped down from his horse immediately. Finally, Dalton followed, his gang spreading out carefully. The canyon suddenly felt much smaller, much more dangerous. Victor looked at the tunnel greedily. "So, where's the gold?" Anna folded her arms. "Inside." Dalton frowned. "And you're sure this place won't collapse on us?" Anna hesitated, then she answered honestly. "No." Victor's patience snapped. "You expect us to walk blindly into a cursed mine?" Anna stared directly at him. "You wanted the treasure." Victor clenched his teeth. Then he turned to Caleb. "You first, cowboy." Caleb looked toward the dark tunnel, then back at Victor. "You really think I'm stupid enough to walk in there while 12 guns point at my back?" Dalton laughed. "He's got a point." For several seconds nobody moved. The tension was unbearable. Then Dalton suddenly raised his revolver and fired. Bang! The bullet struck Victor Kane's hat, sending it flying off his head. Victor spun around furiously. "What the hell was that?" Dalton grinned. "That was me getting tired of this game." He pointed the gun straight at Victor. "You and your boys, drop your rifles." Victor's men immediately raised their weapons. Dalton's gang did the same. The canyon erupted into chaos. Bang, bang, bang. Gunfire exploded from every direction. Dust and smoke filled the air as bullets shattered rocks and sparked against stone. Caleb grabbed Anna's hand and pulled her behind the boulder near the mine entrance. "Stay down." Victor Kane fired wildly while diving behind his horse. Dalton's men spread out along the canyon walls, firing back. Within seconds, the canyon became a deadly battlefield. 2 outlaws fell almost instantly. Another screamed as a bullet tore through his leg. Caleb leaned out from behind the rock and fired his rifle once. Bang! One of Victor's men collapsed into the dirt and stared at him in shock. "You're incredible with that rifle." Caleb reloaded calmly. "Had practice." Gunfire echoed violently through the canyon. Then Caleb heard a voice that froze his blood. "Rufus Dalton. You hiding from me again, Walker?" Caleb slowly stood from behind the rock and grabbed his arm. "No." But Caleb's eyes were cold now. "This ends today." He stepped into the open canyon. Dalton stood 20 yards away, revolver in hand. Their eyes locked. "You remember the night you burned my ranch?" Caleb asked. Dalton shrugged. "Like I said before. Business." Caleb raised his rifle. "My wife died in that fire." Dalton smirked. "Lots of people die in this world, cowboy." Caleb's voice dropped to a whisper. "But tonight?" He cocked the rifle. "You do." Dalton fired first. Bang! Caleb dove aside as the bullet slammed into the rock behind him. Caleb rolled across the dirt and fired back instantly. Crack! Dalton staggered as the bullet tore through his shoulder, but the outlaw didn't fall. He roared with anger and charged forward, firing again. Anna screamed. Caleb ducked behind a rock, reloaded, and stepped out again. Everything seemed to slow. The wind, the dust, the sound of distant gunfire. Dalton raised his revolver. Caleb pulled the trigger. Bang! Dalton stopped. For a moment, he simply stood there. Then the revolver slipped from his hand. He collapsed into the dirt. The leader of the Black Ridge Gang was dead. Across the canyon, Victor Kane realized what had happened. His men were already losing. Half his gang lay on the ground. The rest were retreating toward their horses. Victor cursed loudly. This isn't over. He fired one last shot toward Caleb before jumping onto his horse and riding out of the canyon. The surviving outlaws followed him. Within seconds, the canyon fell silent, dust drifted slowly through the air. The battle was over, and Anna stepped carefully out from behind the rock. Caleb? He stood there, breathing heavily, staring at Dalton's lifeless body. After a long moment, he lowered the rifle. It's finished. Anna walked toward him slowly. You did it. Caleb looked at the dark tunnel entrance beside them, then back at her. What about the mine? Anna smiled faintly. You want to go inside? Caleb thought about it. The gold, the legend, the danger. Then he shook his head. No, Anna blinked in surprise. Why not? Caleb looked around the quiet canyon. At some point a man has to decide what matters more. And he met her eyes. I already found something better than gold. Anna felt her heart skip. You mean? Caleb smiled softly. You asked me one question the night we met. She remembered instantly. May I warm by your fire? And now I'm asking you one, Caleb said. What? He extended his hand toward her. Would you stay? Anna stared at him for a long moment. The lonely cowboy, the man who risked everything for a stranger, the man who now stood before her with hope in his eyes. Slowly, she took his hand. Yes, the wind carried the last traces of dust out of the canyon, somewhere deep inside the mountain. The forgotten San Diablo mine remained silent, its gold untouched, its legend alive. But Caleb Walker didn't care, because the fire he had shared with the stranger on a stormy night had changed both of their lives forever. And for the first time since losing his wife, the lonely cowboy was no longer alone.